You're just a parasite living off of me. If you have a complaint, divorce me and get out." The beer he flung at me out of the blue, along with those words, left me stunned. Has he forgotten all that I had done till now? It's impossible for me to spend a lifetime with such a person. "All right," I said, and left the home that I had lived with my husband for many years. I couldn't possibly stand being called a parasite in silence. My name is Lisa Parker. I'm a 42-year-old housewife. My husband, Mark, is 4 years older than me at 46 and works for the local county office. We've been married for 12 years. We initially both worked, but I quit my job 5 years into our marriage. I actually wanted to continue working. I thought I'd have a child right after getting married, but I started feeling impatient as 2 years passed with no baby. I keenly felt the silent pressure from my in-laws who wanted to see their grandchild. When my mother-in-law finally said, "Is it because you're working that you can't have a child?" I decided to quit my job. I decided to focus on fertility treatments. Many people continue working while undergoing fertility treatments. But I've always had a weak constitution and was anxious about treatments while working. I remember Mark being happy when I quit my job and became a full-time housewife. He assured me that it would be easy to support me on his income alone. Despite quitting my job and becoming a housewife, we still don't have children. Mark was very supportive of the fertility treatments. We both love children and wanted to have one soon. I think I felt a little rushed when my in-laws said they wanted to see their grandchild soon. There was a tremendous struggle before I came to the understanding that having a child doesn't necessarily go according to plan. 5 years have passed since then, and we're no longer undergoing fertility treatments. We tried various things, but we were not blessed with a child. Both Mark and I have had thorough examinations. We thought there might be a problem with one of us. I've heard that many husbands are reluctant to get tested. That was not the case with Mark. I remember feeling relieved when he willingly took the tests. The results showed that we were both healthy and normal, so it seems to be a matter of luck. Also, my health was at its limit to continue the fertility treatments. When I told Mark that I was taking a break from the treatments, his reaction was more intense than I had imagined. "What are you talking about now? Do you know how much the treatments have cost us? Are you planning to continue being a housewife without even undergoing treatments?" He kept blaming me and kept bringing up the cost of treatments. Yes, I know the treatments were expensive and difficult. I felt guilty, and I covered most of the treatment costs with my savings from when I was single. Despite knowing that, Mark kept saying that his hard-earned money was being wasted. "Hold on, that's too harsh. You know my body's at its limit, don't you?" Mark, who only talks about money without any words of concern for his wife's body, finally got to me. That really got my goat. I couldn't help but retort back in a loud voice. "If that's the case, you shouldn't have suggested infertility treatments in the first place." I, who usually never talk back, opposed, and it seemed Mark didn't like that. Yet, he couldn't seem to strongly rebut me. Perhaps he was remembering that he too had agreed to fertility treatments. That day, he left the house and didn't return for quite a while. We had a few fights about the treatment afterward, but things have somehow recently settled down. Maybe Mark has given up on the idea of having a child. I feel guilty about that, but I think we just have to accept that it was our fate. Life as just a couple isn't bad. That's what I kept telling myself. My classmates who have kids seem to be having a hard time financially. Many of my friends continue to work to secure their children's future and their own old age. Mark never outright says it, but he seems unsatisfied with me quitting the treatment and becoming a housewife. After much thought, I decided to start a side job that I could do from home. Immediately, I told Mark about it when he came home from work. Mark laughed at my story as if it was a joke. If it were that easy to make money, nobody would go out to work. Starting with those words, he started to endlessly talk about how busy he is working during the day. Most of it was complaints about dealing with the public. Mark, whose main job is dealing with the public at the counter, seems to be under a lot of stress. "A job you can do from home? Well, at least make enough for my allowance. Not that I'm expecting much." Mark ended the conversation like that. I think Mark probably didn't understand even half of what I said. If he had understood, he wouldn't have reacted like that. I tried to explain again, but Mark was no longer listening. "Don't try to enjoy working from home, just go get a part-time job somewhere." As I tried to start speaking, Mark turned a displeased face toward me. Mark somehow has the perception that he's the only one working. This won't do for a conversation. I decided in my heart not to talk about my side job until I can proudly tell Mark about the money I've earned. And so, I started a side job from home. Mark remains unchanged, not promoted, and always in the same department. It's rare for a public servant to be in the same department for over 3 years. It seems that he is thought to be unhelpful in other departments. Mark, who has been left behind while his peers are steadily being promoted, seems more stressed than ever, which I can tell. Firstly, the amount of alcohol he consumes at home has increased. Of course, the number of times he comes home drunk after drinking outside has also increased. Moreover, he always comes home completely drunk. And the next day, he would take the day off due to a hangover. This would surely affect his attendance record. On top of that, he didn't like me constantly on the computer even on my days off and had started going to the slot machines, something he had never done before. Sometimes he wins, but most of the time he loses. I once told Mark that it's a waste of money and suggested he find another hobby. Mark retorted, "What do you know?" before storming out. He returned late at night, thoroughly drunk. When I was called out to the front door in response to a loud call, the taxi driver was supporting Mark, who seemed unable to stand on his own due to his drunkenness. I dumped Mark in his room next to the entrance as he was. The taxi driver said apologetically, "I haven't received the fare yet." I planned to pay it from Mark's wallet, so I found his wallet and checked it. It was completely empty. He probably blew it all at the casino. In a hurry, I paid the taxi fare from my own wallet that I had left in the kitchen. I wonder what he would have done if I hadn't been home when he took a taxi home drunk and penniless. The next morning, Mark woke up with his usual hangover. He claimed to have no memory of the previous night. "You've been drinking too much lately. It's not good for your health, be careful." As I handed him a hangover remedy and water, Mark made a somewhat malicious expression. I braced myself for some sarcastic comment, but he said nothing. But I am certain that he harbors some dissatisfaction with my words deep down. Proof of that is that he has stopped making eye contact with me entirely. Despite it being a much-awaited weekend, Mark shuts himself in his bedroom due to his hangover. After finishing house chores, I sat down in front of my computer to do my work. Public servants have a 2-day weekend. I decided to be lenient and let him enjoy his heavy drinking on a Saturday. With these thoughts in mind, I start my work. At first, I was worried about Mark, but as I focused on my work, I completely forgot about him. Time flies when you're focused. Before I knew it, it was Sunday evening. Mark's hangover was severe, and he was unable to eat lunch. As night approaches, he seems to be somewhat back to his usual condition. I was focused on my work until Mark, who spent his day off lounging in bed, called out, "Dinner." "Huh? Is it that time already? I didn't notice because I was so focused." Startled by Mark's voice, I checked the clock on the wall. It was almost 7 p.m. "Hurry up, I'm hungry." Mark, leaning on the entrance door with his arms crossed, looked disgruntled. Indeed, I had completely forgotten about dinner, that was my mistake. Feeling sorry, I left my computer. I hadn't done any shopping, so I had to make dinner with what was left in the refrigerator. I prepared dinner in a hurry. While I was busily preparing dinner in the kitchen, Mark was sprawled out on the living room sofa, doing nothing. From time to time, he called out, "Isn't it ready yet?" "It'll be ready soon, sorry. Please wait a bit." "You're slow, hurry up. You're a stay-at-home wife, and you can't even do this right." As Mark continued to complain while lying around, I gradually became irritated. If he was so hungry, he could at least help a little. I felt my remorse gradually changing into resentment towards Mark. My movements as I prepared dinner became rougher. He must have heard the sounds in the living room. I heard a sharp tisk from the living room. Because of all this, the atmosphere at dinner was terrible. Watching Mark eat his meal in silence with a sullen face, I felt fed up. It must have shown on my face. Suddenly, Mark splashed the beer he was drinking at me. Caught off guard by the cold beer in my face, I was momentarily stunned. The beer was chilled and I certainly hadn't expected such an action from Mark. Beer was dripping from my chin. "If you have a problem living off my hard work, you parasite, then get a divorce and get out." His face, flushed red, probably from the alcohol, was shouting at me, still stunned. He kept grumbling even after his outburst. "A parasite? You think of me as a parasite?" I asked Mark, looking straight at him. It upset me more to be called a parasite than having beer thrown at me. I need him to correct those words and apologize no matter what. At my thoughts, Mark snorted in derision. Don't feel like you're working just because you do a little side job for pocket money. You're not working, you're spending all of my earnings and savings on infertility treatments, and even after all that, we don't have a child. You stopped the treatment because you were feeling unwell and remain a housewife. Mark began his usual rant about how much stress he's under from work. Indeed, being a public service clerk likely involved a lot of complaints. I empathize with that, but it was Mark who chose this job. He should simply do his job without constantly complaining about it. If we were both working, my hardships would have been less. I might have quit this job I hate. I'm working and enduring for your sake. Mark was blaming me for all the stress from his work. I was truly taken aback. I don't remember him being like this. Maybe his personality changed as he watched his peers climb up the career ladder. Seeing me listening silently, Mark smirked unpleasantly. He seemed to mistake my silence for my inability to argue back. Truthfully, I was just too astounded to speak. If you have complaints, then let's divorce. Mark repeated the word divorce again. Does he think that mentioning divorce will make me reflect on my actions and apologize? Understood. I replied calmly. I had nothing else to say to Mark. If he wants to make a fuss about divorce, then let's divorce. Determined, I wiped the beer off with a towel that was nearby. It was sticky and uncomfortable. I'll leave. I got up and opened the drawer where I keep my important belongings. In there was a divorce paper that we had written together as a precaution to stay close to each other when we first got married. I never thought we would have to use it. The divorce paper already has both of our signatures. We just need to fill in the date and submit it. Mark, remember this? The divorce paper we wrote when we first got married. It's a pity that we have to use it. I opened the divorce paper in front of Mark to show him. Mark seemed to have completely forgotten the existence of the divorce papers, his eyes wavering a bit in shock. My affection for him cooled immediately, making me think he wasn't really serious about the word divorce. I was so mad at myself for not seeing that he was such a small-minded man. I neatly folded the divorce papers and tucked them into my pocket. Hurry up and get a lawyer to process this. I'll feel refreshed once I get rid of this parasite. Get it over with quickly. I finished my dinner and left the dining table as it was. I returned to my room, quickly packing only what I needed into my bag. Mark was still drinking beer in the dining room, but I decided to leave the house without saying a word to him. Honestly, I didn't want to see Mark's face anymore. I boarded the train and returned to my parents' house. My parents' home is about an hour and a half away by train. My mother looked surprised to see me come home without any notice, but she seemed to sense something was wrong by my demeanor. I'm home. When I said that in a small voice, my mother warmly welcomed me with welcome back. Whether it was the relief from hearing my mother's voice, I don't know, but I ended up sitting down right at the front door. My father, wondering what was going on, also showed his face at the entrance. Seeing me sitting down at the entrance, he seemed to sense something was wrong as well. And so, I returned to the comfort of my parents' home. Once I had calmed down a bit, I told my parents what had happened tonight. My parents, who knew that I, who had been frail since I was a child, had been working hard on infertility treatments, were beyond angry and flabbergasted at Mark's lack of consideration. When I finally told them that I was called a parasite, my father slammed his teacup down on the table. The noise was so loud that both my mother and I were startled. Looking at me, my father said quietly, "Fight this through to the end." The next morning, I contacted a lawyer. I went straight to the lawyer's office. My marriage to Mark will be over soon. After visiting the lawyer's office, on the way home, I passed by the town hall where my husband works. There was Mark. As I thought about our life as a married couple, there weren't many good memories. Thinking it couldn't be, I thought back to our newlywed life with Mark, but indeed, there were no wonderful memories. I was convinced in my mind that we divorced because we were meant to divorce. While Mark was at work, I returned to the house where we had been living together and quickly moved out my belongings. It would be impossible for me to do it alone, so I asked my father and brother to lend me a car. Thinking that some heavy lifting would be necessary, even my cousins who lived nearby came to help. At this time, all the men in my family unanimously said, "We thought you would divorce." Even my brother had said he didn't like Mark from the time of the wedding. "Why didn't you oppose my marriage then?" I couldn't help but blurt it out. My father and brothers laughed out loud at my words. Apparently, they had opposed it, and I had just forgotten. Just like the saying love is blind, I was infatuated with Mark before our marriage. Opposing opinions probably didn't reach me. I felt a little embarrassed, realizing that memory is something that can be overwritten to suit one's convenience. After removing the necessary items, I wrote a letter to Mark. I left a note stating that my lawyer is processing the divorce, and that I had already moved out my belongings, so he could do as he pleased with the rest. I tried to think of something nice to add, but nothing came to mind. Finishing the letter brought me an incredible sense of relief, to the point where I was surprised at myself. The moment I locked the front door and threw the keys into the mailbox, I felt like dancing. I realized that my marriage to Mark had been a continual exercise in patience. I had braced myself for Mark's immediate contact, but there was none on the day I moved out, or the day after. Then, 3 days after I left the house, I spent the day shopping with my mother for the first time in a long while. It was partly a change of pace, but I also wanted to thank my mother who had accepted me back home without saying anything. As it was nearly Father's Day, I decided to pick out a gift for my father with her. After enjoying the shopping, we returned home a bit past 6 p.m. I had unintentionally left my cell phone at home, and I hurriedly checked it when I got back. There were a terrifying number of calls and emails from Mark. Among Mark's calls, there were also calls from a friend. He's probably asking around my friends for my whereabouts. I felt sorry for the trouble I had caused my friends. As I was wondering whether or not to contact Mark, my phone buzzed, notifying me of an incoming call. When I checked the screen, it was Mark calling. I knew I couldn't keep running away forever, so I decided to pick up. "Lisa, where are you? Things are really bad." The moment I answered the phone, Mark's yelling filled my ears. He sounded very frantic, and I couldn't make out the words he was blurting out. "Huh? What? I've already submitted the divorce papers, we're practically strangers now. I don't know what's so bad, but it doesn't concern me, does it?" I deliberately spoke slowly. I hoped that it would further irritate Mark. My provocation easily riled up Mark. "You just went and hired a lawyer on your own." He made it sound like I had done everything on my own, even though he was the one who had initiated the divorce. This really got on my nerves. "Hold on a minute, remember, you were the one who wanted a divorce, right, Mark? Feeling liberated now that the parasite is gone, are we? Oh, did you realize that maybe you're the parasite?" At my words, I could hear Mark catching his breath on the other end of the line. I had expected the call would come soon. "Did you think I didn't know about your debt?" Actually, Mark had a debt. It was a debt he had accumulated from gambling. It was about 5 years ago when I found out that he was deeply in debt from casino and boat racing. Mark's excuse was terrible. He seemed to think that since I was spending money on infertility treatments, he should be able to spend as well. I remember being confused when he told me that. In the end, we promised to repay this debt together. Mark, who had cried and promised never to gamble again, continued to do so, and I knew it. "Did you think you could repay your debt and live a normal life on just the living expenses you give me?" Mark was silent on the other end of the line. Mark used to hand over the living expenses from his salary to me, and he was free to use the rest as he wished. At first, he would give me the money to repay his debts separately from the living expenses, but eventually, the debt repayment money stopped being included in the living expenses envelope. He had fallen into gambling. "Let me guess, you've been borrowing money from your family to repay the debts, haven't you? Are you mooching off them too?" Mark spat out with as much sarcasm as he could muster. He seemed to think that I was borrowing money from my family to meet the monthly debt repayments. He even seemed to know that the money he was giving me wasn't enough to repay the debt. "I haven't borrowed a single penny from my family. I've been repaying your debts with the money I earned from my side job. But now that we are strangers, I don't have any obligation to repay your debts. Did you really think that you could live a normal life while repaying debts with your salary alone?" Mark must have called because he'd been contacted by his creditor. The money he borrowed wasn't from a particularly reputable source. He borrowed from banks, maxed out his credit cards, and ended up in debt to financial companies. There was some debt collection involved. It seems they contacted his workplace. He was panicking. "So, it's not me who is the parasite. You were my parasite, Mark. Stop lying. You can't possibly have made that much money from a woman's work-at-home job. Stop showing off. Just go borrow some money from your family and pay it back." Mark was always looking down on me. I couldn't help but sigh in disbelief. My side job is affiliate marketing. You could look it up on the internet. If you try a bit, you can easily out-earn your salary. I wonder why you didn't realize this when I was no longer dependent on you, especially since you are a public servant. The truth is, the side job I chose was quite profitable. I won't say that anyone can make money from it. How much you earn probably varies from person to person. But my strategy, based on the skills and experience I gained while working in a major corporation's marketing team, was a huge success. Well, that's how it is. I said that and hung up the phone. Mark tried to say something, but I didn't feel like listening to the end. It would probably be something like, pay for me, or I need a loan. Hanging up the phone made me feel like I'd really severed ties with Mark. He probably had other debts that I'd been repaying, and maybe even new ones he'd taken on. Well, it's none of my business anymore. After that, Mark kept calling me for several days. He seems to have come to my family home when I was out, but my father sent him away. At that time, he reportedly said, "I want you to lend me some money." Just how greedy can he be? To think I used the money I earned to repay his debts. It was ridiculous. He should have relied on his parents, but apparently, he'd already done so. He'd borrowed a large amount from his in-laws, and had been disowned without my knowledge. I did feel a distance growing between us and his parents at one point. Mark had told me that his brother and his wife had moved in with them, so they were keeping their distance to avoid being a nuisance, but that must have been a lie. Unable to rely on his own family, he kept borrowing money to repay his debts. I always figured he'd eventually go bankrupt, but it came about surprisingly soon. In the end, he seems to have borrowed money from loan sharks, and even the city hall was hit by debt collectors. There were also harassing phone calls that caused the city hall's phone lines to go crazy, causing a big problem. Eventually, rumors spread, and Mark lost his place at work and resigned. I heard rumors that he is now unemployed and on the run from debt collectors. He has become less than a parasite now, more like scum. Having moved back to my family home, I decided to stay there. We're renovating the slightly old family home, and my mother is putting her heart into creating an English garden she's always longed for. My affiliate marketing is going well, and I'm not short of money. Most of all, I'm happy that I can spend the money I've earned on my own. Once the English garden is complete, I'm thinking of opening a cafe. Sorry to bother you as always. I'll be counting on you again this time. Mia, sporting a cheeky smile as she said this, seemed to feel no guilt for making us foot the bill. She took for granted that she could join our trips and use Rick like a personal ATM, leading me to sigh for what must have been the umpteenth time. Oh, by the way, this time Mia's parents are also coming along. Thrown off by this unexpected change of plans, I was caught off guard. Of course, Mia had no intention of paying for her parents' travel expenses. Rick, trying to maintain his generosity in front of Mia, wouldn't dare to ask her to chip in. I knew for a fact that he would come back to me later, asking me to pay half. Despite the surprise, I was secretly pleased with the unexpected turn of events. I glance at the excited Rick and chuckle under my breath. Yes, that's fine. It'll be the last time anyway. Last time? I nodded, giving a broad smile. The two of them looked surprised for a moment, but soon burst out laughing. Right, sure, they chuckled, thinking my words were just a joke and not taking them seriously. They resumed their friendly chat. Seeing the two of them so carried away, I didn't even respond. In my bag, I gently caressed a certain tool, eagerly awaiting the moment of my revenge. My name is Mary. I'm turning 63 this year. We used to love traveling. From an early age, we would arrange our work schedules a few times a year to enjoy domestic trips. This didn't change after we had children or even after retirement. I thought we would continue to enjoy our hobby in this way. Everything changed when Mia, the wife of our eldest son, started visiting our house. After our eldest son, Max, got married, Mia started visiting our home quite often. Even busy with work, Max seemed to feel relieved knowing that Mia was visiting her in-laws' house. So, I didn't say anything. We were happy to have Mia, who was young enough to be our own daughter, coming to visit us out of affection. However, what began to bother me was the attitude of my husband, Rick, towards Mia. Thank you so much for always treating me to dinner. It's okay. It's worth cooking when you visit. Right. She only has cooking as a hobby. That's why she's really happy when Mia visits. When Rick talked with Mia, he often started to belittle me. He constantly compared me with Mia, who is young enough to be my daughter. Mia has beautiful skin, or you should learn from Mia's sense of beauty. He would take any opportunity to praise Mia and put me down. Sure, Mia always came to our house with a beautiful hairstyle and dressed up. However, it's troubling for both Mia and me to be compared with someone who has a generation gap as big as a parent and child. I tried to correct Rick, who kept on talking excitedly, alcohol included. Could you stop it? You're making Mia uncomfortable, aren't you? What's wrong with saying the truth? Are you jealous of a beautiful girl? Of course not. What are you saying? Then don't complain. Sorry, Mia. My wife isn't as young as you, so she gets irritated easily. With a smug smile, Rick shrugged it off, and I sighed in frustration. Perhaps because we didn't have a daughter, Rick was overjoyed when a cute woman like Mia became our son's wife. But recently, Rick's behavior seems to have gone too far. Not only does he belittle me, but he's constantly doting on Mia, visibly enthralled by her. I thought it was some kind of joke, but I haven't forgotten the careless words that an emboldened Rick let slip. You are always so kind to me. I appreciate it. Yeah? Well, I bet I'm a better man than Max. Hey, what are you saying? Max has always been coward. Unlike him, I could protect Mia. Rick was implying to Mia that he was a better man than Max. The thought of him saying such things to Mia, my daughter-in-law, made me feel repulsed. I hear you two often go on trips. I heard it from Max. Yes, it's been a hobby of ours for a long time. I envy you. Max has been so busy with work, we haven't gone on a trip in forever. Mia kept a bright smile on her face and turned her gaze toward Rick. I felt a chill at her expression, anticipating Rick's next words. Really? How about joining us on our next trip? Are you sure? I feel a little bad. Rick brightened his expression and said this to Mia while grinning. He didn't seem to care about my opinion at all. Mia, too, showed no sign of holding back, even as she said she felt bad. She glanced at me, cupping her cheeks with both hands. But I don't have any money to spend freely. Don't worry, we invited you, so we'll cover it. Right? Oh, yes, I guess. When Rick looked to me for agreement, Mia took Rick's hand with a triumphant smile, expressing her gratitude. Perhaps it was my imagination, but Mia was indeed smiling at me with a narrowed, contented gaze. We're planning to head out at the beginning of next month, so be ready. Yes. Got it, thank you. In the end, the two of them were getting excited without even considering me. All I could do was watch with a cold gaze. So what are we going to do? We haven't reserved a hotel room for Mia. Well, we'll have to do it now, won't we? Please take care of it. Why should I have to do it, when you were the one who happily invited her? Why are you being so cold, knowing Mia is coming? After Mia left, when I informed Rick that we had only made reservations for two, he said something absurd. Despite his pompous demand of be kind to Mia, Rick didn't lift a finger to make the hotel reservations or even secure the theater tickets we had planned on. What's more, he even hesitated to cover the costs, despite his grand boasts. Yet, despite his attitude, he made the creepy joke of, if need be, Mia can sleep in my room, which left me at my wit's end. This discomfort, naturally, continued during the trip. Even during the trip, Rick never stopped trying to appease Mia. After Mia expressed disinterest in the theater, I ended up wasting the tickets I had prepared and had to change our plans. It was quite frustrating. I was frustrated with Rick, who, without reproaching Mia, wooed her while being lovey-dovey. Listen, Mia. We appreciate you coming with us, but it's a problem if you mess up our travel schedule. Oops. Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. Your husband is so kind, I just got spoiled. That's fine. I'm happy when you rely on me. No matter how much I conveyed, Mia would wink at Rick, and a peculiar pattern where Rick would rebuke me in turn was established. Mia, clearly understanding that Rick was on her side, was often seen making manipulative comments. And whatever I said, Rick would only brazenly retort, "What's wrong with pampering my daughter? I'm sorry, I'm always the one having fun. Really, I must be a nuisance, right? Not at all. I'm really enjoying having Mia with us. My wife is the one who is more of a nuisance, always complaining." Do you really mean that? Once Mia tasted the good life, she started coming to our house just in time for our trips and naturally started accompanying us. Perhaps Rick had been inviting Mia in advance, knowing that he was going to travel. I was not informed about any of this. Despite that, the extra travel expenses due to Mia were mostly left to me. During the trip, Mia always left the payments to Rick, never even attempting to open her wallet. In fact, she didn't even bring a wallet. This is so cute. I want it as a souvenir. That's okay, I'll pay for it. Let's go buy it. Really? Thank you. The additional expenses for Mia kept increasing because Rick, wanting to please her, would readily jump in to pay. And always afterwards, Rick would concoct some strange reasoning like, "I'm just responding to Mia's requests," and resist even more when handing over the money to me. The trip, which was supposed to be enjoyable, became nothing but additional expenses. Nothing went as planned, and I grew increasingly disgusted. Such trips continued time and again, causing my irritation to intensify. Since talking to the two of them did not solve anything, I decided to complain directly to Max about Mia. However, the response that came back from Max was beyond my expectations and was extremely harsh. "Hey Max, Mia has been tagging along on our trips forever. Can't something be done about this?" I said. "Well, I've heard that Dad is happily inviting Mia on these trips, you know?" Max replied. "The problem is that they decide everything on their own. And they won't pay a dime." Oh? Wait a minute. Isn't that strange? I've heard that Mia actually pays for her own expenses, right? From what I could tell, Max seemed to have been fed a distorted story by Mia. He seemed to completely believe the tale that Mia was paying for her own expenses because my husband Rick was insistently inviting her on these trips. Of course, I hadn't received a single penny from Mia, and given Rick's personality, I doubted he had either. And yet, Max seemed to think I was making up this story to spite Mia. That's absurd. If that's what you think, she doesn't have to come anymore. Mia is trying to get along with you guys, you know. You don't have to talk like that, right? Why should I get along with someone who fabricates lies and makes others out to be the bad guys? I tried to explain the truth to Max, but I didn't have any concrete proof that Mia wasn't paying for the trips. Max seemed to be in a dilemma over whom to trust, me or Mia. Later, Max apparently talked to Mia again, who stuck to her story that she was paying her fair share. In fact, she complained to Max that it was unfair for me to claim she wasn't paying when she was, and that she felt unliked. Overwhelmed by her tearful appeal, Max sighed over the phone, seemingly taking Mia's side. At Max's doubt, I was at my wit's end. Mia never takes out her wallet when she comes on these trips. She always says she has no disposable income because she's not working. But she's been telling me that she's paying, Max defended. In that case, isn't she traveling on your earnings? If she really is paying, calculate exactly how much she's put in. In the face of such hostile circumstances, I found myself snapping at Max. I had reached my limit with Mia, who was making me look bad with her petty behavior, and Rick, who was consistently falling for it. In order to obtain evidence to convince Max, I decided to take revenge on the two. Then, on the next trip, Mia came along as always. Her small branded bag seemed to hold little more than a handkerchief and her smartphone, with no signs of a wallet, of course. "Sorry for always being a bother. I appreciate your help this time too." As she said this with a smirk, she seemed to feel neither guilt nor anything else about making others pay for her. As usual, Mia climbed into the passenger seat of Rick's car and flashed him a friendly smile. Rick responded to Mia's behavior with a lax face. Seeing the two of them, I sighed again. I might have usually tolerated it all. But not this time. Coughing slightly in the back seat, I glared at the two I was planning to push into hell. About today's trip plan, how about this place? I've always wanted to visit there. Oh, great. I'll take you everywhere you want to go, Mia. I'm so happy. Thank you. Despite not bringing a single penny herself, Mia seemed fully prepared in terms of where she wanted to go and started proposing ideas in front of me, completely ignoring the previously agreed plan. With her smartphone, she kept telling Rick, "I want this. I want to go here." Like always, I didn't pay much attention and instead, checked the preparations for my revenge. Suddenly, Rick turned to look at me as if he had just remembered something and blurted out the most outrageous thing. "Oh right, Mia's parents are joining us this time too." "Excuse me? I told my parents about our trips and they got jealous. I thought I'd invite Mia's parents this time since it's a special occasion. Of course, I'm going to cover all the costs so Mia doesn't need to worry about anything." He informed Mia with a grin and gave me a sidelong glance. Caught off guard by the sudden change in plans, I was speechless. Regarding Mia's parents' expenses, of course, she probably has no intention of paying, and Rick is just pretending to be generous in front of Mia right now. He probably has no real intention of paying either. He'd most likely tell me to pay half once we got back home. Surprised and annoyed by this unexpected development, I had to suppress a chuckle. "Really? That's convenient." Upon hearing my response, Rick looked at me with a sly smile. Right? Right? He was in such a good mood that he even started humming as he resumed driving. Perhaps he misunderstood that he could now curry favor with Mia's parents with his wife's approval. Or he may have thought that since I said it was convenient, I'd generously foot the bill. I glance at the excited Rick and chuckle under my breath. "Thank you so much." "No problem. This is the last time, anyway." "Huh? The last time?" With a broad smile, I responded to her. Both of them looked at me in surprise for a moment but then began laughing. "You're joking, right?" They seemed to think I was kidding and didn't take me seriously. "Mia is like our own daughter, of course. We'll keep going on trips together, right?" "Of course. So please keep taking care of me." Ignoring the overconfident duo, I maintained my smile without saying a word. Even the unexpected events that Rick hadn't informed me about were bearable, thinking that the two of them were about to experience hell. When we arrived at the hotel in the evening, we met up with Mia's parents and were all led to our rooms. As usual, Mia and Rick both announced that they were going to rest in the room. Of course, these two were in separate rooms, but I knew exactly what they were up to when they said this. So, I intentionally said to them, "I think I'll have a drink with Mia's parents, since it's a special occasion." "Sure, take your time." Creating a situation where they could be alone, they cheerfully said take your time, and Mia even waved at me with a grin. The way they seemed more at ease without me around confirmed my suspicions. Anticipating that they would let their guard down, I approached Mia's parents. "There's something I'd like you to see, is that okay?" As they looked at me quizzically, I quietly launched an app on my smartphone and began to play a video. "Wow! What a nice room! Your room is nice too." "Really? Then you can come to this room too, right?" The video I started to show them was streaming from a camera I had set up in the room earlier. This was the room where Rick and I were staying, and Mia had just walked in as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Mia's parents watched with puzzled faces as they took in the sight of their daughter and Rick, who were quite familiar with each other. "It's like I'm preparing the hotel and the trip for Mia. Heck, we could even go on a trip just the two of us, without my wife. That would be too pitiful for your wife. But she is really mad that I'm not paying. Don't worry about it, Mia. I'll give her a piece of my mind." The screen was continuously displaying the exchange between a fawning Mia and a pleased Rick. The interaction between the two, unthinkable for a father-in-law and daughter-in-law, was heating up. They seemed to be having fun at my expense. As Alice, Mia's mother, saw her own daughter comfortably hurling outrageous insults at me, she turned pale and looked at me. What on earth? What is my daughter doing? This footage is being streamed from a camera we left in my and my husband's room. It seems your daughter is currently talking to my husband in our room. I thought this trip was because Mia wanted to express her gratitude to us. Oh, really? I was only informed today that both of you were coming. Seems she decided on her own again. I revealed everything about the trip and other things to the two of them, without hiding anything. The fact that Mia wasn't contributing financially at all, Rick's attitude, and the fact that the two were neglecting me. As I explained, the two confessed as if through the camera. Because of this, the complexion of the two who had been watching next to me changed hectically, turning red and pale. Throughout this, I was quietly recording while watching the various words of Rick, who was smirking, and his words to his daughter-in-law that didn't seem like lines. My daughter has done something terrible. I truly don't know how to apologize. I appreciate your understanding. I intend to sever ties with these two after this. Looking at the two who were downcast and speechless, I thought it would be cruel to torment them anymore, and when the time was right, I headed for the room. I forcefully opened the door of the two's room, thinking that it was about time to reveal the truth. Whoa, Mary! What the heck, all of a sudden? What? Is there something inconvenient about me returning to my own room? I didn't say that. Don't just barge in, you'll scare us. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were jumpy because you had something to hide. As I said that, I replayed the footage from earlier in front of the two. Seeing their parents' faces behind me, the two became flustered, and I sighed at their ridiculousness. Did you want to come on a trip by yourselves? Were Mia's parents and I in the way? Well, that's... Mia, I heard from your parents that if you invite them on a trip to express gratitude, you should at least pay for it yourself. No, that's not it. That's not it. It's because he said he would give me money. Mia, who was desperately trying to defend herself, kept making excuses, and Rick, who was blustering about the camera I had prepared in secret. Seeing the two who couldn't even apologize at this point, I felt my heart growing colder. Is what she's saying true? Max. The person who appeared at the perfect timing was Max, who had been away on a business trip. Mia was surprised by the unexpected guest, and her face turned pale as she gasped. Of course, I had called Max ahead of time for this occasion. Noticing the discrepancy between the amount in the household account and the travel expenses, Max, who had finally felt something was off, was no longer likely to side with Mia. Mia, were you lying? It's not like that. It's because your dad said I didn't have to pay. I just took advantage of that, please believe me. Oh, really? You've been making me pay because you said you were short of money because of Mia. I operated my smartphone and replayed another video at full volume. It was a pathetic conversation where Rick was reluctant to pay for the trip. Because I feel sorry for Mia, I'll cover her expenses, and you also wanted to go on this trip, so you should pay for it, echoed Rick's nonsensical remarks throughout the room. This guy, he's so broke that he has to make me pay. What? He's the worst. I was trying to be a good daughter-in-law because I thought he had money. At Rick's lowly remarks emanating from the smartphone, Mia's true nature finally emerged. The person who sternly condemned Mia, who was wide-eyed and trying to insult Rick, was Mia's mother, Alice, who had been listening quietly in the background. Who's the real lowlife here? I'm so embarrassed as a parent. Alice, with a red face, severely reprimanded Mia. So much so that neither Max nor I had a chance to intervene. You are no longer my daughter. I shouldn't have believed that you were offering this trip as a gift. I didn't mean it like that. This is so unfair. As Mia's voice echoed through the room, I instinctively reprimanded Alice. Seeing this, Rick quietly came over to me and finally offered an apology, saying, "Sorry for trying to look good in front of my son's wife." However, I was fed up with Rick's attitude, which seemed to imply that he expected forgiveness because he had apologized. When we came here, I said it would be the last time. I don't need a husband who fawns over his son's wife anymore. What? Why? I'm apologizing, aren't I? Do you think an apology will suffice? You're such a disappointment." With that, I expressed my desire for a divorce. It was then that Rick finally realized the irreversible mistake he had made. He knelt down on the spot and drooped. After the disastrous trip, Max also apologized when he learned the truth. The cost of Mia's trip, which I had covered, would be repaid by Mia, who seemed to have been affected by her parents' admonishment. Mia decided to work part-time, without any help from Max. In addition to the trip, I heard that the branded bags and accessories that Rick had been fervently gifting were confiscated. Rick has been going around telling people I ended up divorcing because I was being milked by Mia. It seems like he's causing more trouble in that regard as well. I heard that he even went to Mia's place demanding her to repay the money he had spent on her. It caused quite a commotion. Was Dad always like this? I only remember him and Mom getting along well. I wonder. In retrospect, he seems to have just been a lazy man with whom I shared a common interest in travel. Max was disappointed in Rick, who lacked any sense of authority as a father. He vented his frustrations to me about Rick's behavior. However, from my perspective, the story only reinforced that it was a good thing we had divorced. Because Rick had spoiled Mia so much, he had almost no money left. I successfully divorced him and now live comfortably by myself, having kicked him out. Now, I'm planning a trip to wherever I want to go, undisturbed and making up for all the times I had been made to endure in the past. You should forgive me for stealing some money, after all, we're family. That was my husband's justification when he was taking money from my purse. However, when he was initially caught, he didn't say anything as severe. Instead, he sincerely apologized and paid me back. I ended up being lenient, but it was later revealed that he had also been stealing from our son. When I found out, I resolved to disclose his wrongdoings to our son and mother-in-law who lived with us. There's no need to be considerate any longer to a man who causes trouble not only to me, but also to our son. I've kept quiet so far, but the truth is that my husband. In a fit of anger, I exposed Greg's misconducts. My name is Mary Miller. I'm 46, working part-time and a housewife at home. I married Greg 20 years ago. He's a serious company employee, and I think he's a good husband. Now we're living as a family of 4, including our 17-year-old son Mark, and my mother-in-law, Mrs. Deborah. Lately, Mark has been cold more often, perhaps because of his rebellious phase. But Mark is a kind boy at heart and is currently working hard studying for college admission. I believe this rebellious phase will pass in time, so it's a matter of enduring till then. Mrs. Deborah recently lost her husband due to an illness. She originally lived with her husband, but after his death, we thought it would be hard for the elderly Mrs. Deborah to continue living alone, so she moved in with us. However, having lost her beloved husband, Mrs. Deborah has been down for a while. She's usually mild-mannered and laughs a lot, so her current state was worrisome. I tried to be as gentle as I could with Mrs. Deborah, in an attempt to alleviate her emotional burden. Despite these issues, we were a normal family living reasonably happy days. However, happiness proved to be a fragile thing, capable of collapsing without warning. One day, I went shopping, and when I tried to pay, I realized 3 $10 bills were missing. I had withdrawn it from the ATM the previous day and had definitely put it in my purse. The purse was securely closed in my bag, and it was unlikely that the bills would slip out and fall on the road. Could it be that someone took it? A nasty suspicion crossed my mind, but there was no solid evidence. The loss was only $30, so I decided not to pursue it further and observe the situation. However, the next morning, more money was missing. This time $50 was gone. It was definitely in my purse when I checked last night. The purse had been in the house all night, and there were no signs of a thief. Unpleasant as the thought was, I could only assume someone in the family took it. I decided to consult Greg about it. When I explained the situation in detail, Greg, looking evasive, said, "Actually, I know who the culprit is. It's Mark. He was rummaging through your bag when he woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. Maybe he thinks it's okay to do this much to his parents because he's in his rebellious phase." I couldn't believe it. No matter how rebellious, Mark wouldn't resort to stealing money. Greg's shifting gaze was also concerning. So, I proposed this. "All right, I'll talk to Mark myself. I think he might be more willing to talk to me since we don't spend much time together. Greg readily agreed to this. It wasn't that I believed what Greg said. Rather, his nervousness made me suspicious. I thought it might be best to clarify the perpetrator. I bought a small surveillance camera and installed it in an inconspicuous place. I positioned it so that it would capture my purse, which I left untouched for a day. Checking my wallet, another $50 is gone. Checked the recorded footage and there was the culprit. It wasn't Mark. It was Greg. Making sure there was no one around, he didn't hesitate to take money from my wallet. Seeing this, I felt intense anger. Stealing money is bad enough, but trying to frame my son was something I couldn't forgive. When I confronted Greg with the evidence, he was flustered and stuttered, "No, that's not it, I mean." "What do you mean that's not it? It's clear as day that you're the one stealing. Why would you do such a thing?" Greg began to explain in resignation. "I have a gambling debt. I was desperate for money." I was completely thrown off. I had no idea that Greg was gambling or that he had a debt. "Is that true?" "Yeah, it's not a lie." Greg brought out some documents. They indicated that he was in debt for a total of $5,000. "Oh no." I was at a loss for words. Greg began to desperately explain. "I thought you would be mad if I told the truth, so I blamed Mark. I'm sorry for lying and keeping my debt a secret. I have a plan to pay it back, and I'm slowly repaying it from my salary. I'll make sure Mark goes to college and you won't have any trouble living." Greg apologized many times and repaid the money. Since he seemed genuinely remorseful, I decided to forgive him. "All right, I'll trust you this one time. But if you do it again, I won't forgive you." I was stern in my warning, but I didn't want to worry Mark or Mrs. Deborah unnecessarily, so I decided to keep quiet for the time being. But as they say, trouble comes in threes. This was just the beginning of real hardships. A week after the debt was revealed, Greg kept his promise and stopped stealing money from my purse. But when Greg came home, he looked very gloomy and said, "My salary has been cut." According to Greg, his company was not doing well recently, and his salary had to be cut. Almost by $1,000. With a debt and Mark's college tuition to save up for, what are we supposed to do? I was at a loss. After thinking about it, I decided to take on more part-time work. I started working at a 24-hour fast food restaurant from late at night until early morning. It would be physically tough, but the night shift paid more, so I decided to give it a try. Obviously, I had to tell Mark and Mrs. Deborah about this, so I called them into the living room. Then, Mark said he had something serious to discuss, so I decided to listen to his story first. I thought it would be about his studies or college plans, but what he said was completely unexpected. "For about a week, money has been disappearing from my piggy bank. Yesterday, I saw Dad opening my piggy bank without my permission. When I asked him what he was doing, he dodged the question. It was suspicious." Hearing this, I was at a loss for words. Mrs. Deborah had a look of disbelief on her face. Could it be Greg had changed his target to Mark? The idea of a husband stealing money from his own son was unthinkable. But then again, Greg has a history of trying to pin his own guilt on Mark, and he's strapped for cash. At that moment, Mrs. Deborah said something shocking. "When Greg was in high school, he once tried to steal a video game he had borrowed from a classmate. I thought it was okay because I scolded him severely. Come to think of it, things frequently disappeared when I was a member of my college club. Greg was also a member of that club. By this point, it was only natural to consider Greg as the culprit. For now, I decided to hold on to Mark's piggy bank." "So, you have something to say to us too, right? What's going on?" Mark asked me, so I told them both, "Actually, I have to take on a part-time job morning and night." "Why? Do you and Greg not have enough money?" Mrs. Deborah asked. I was not sure how much to say, but I decided to tell them everything. There's no need to tiptoe around a man who not only inconveniences me but also our son. "I've kept it from you too, but actually, my husband." I confessed Greg's misdeeds, seething with anger. 2 weeks later, Mark, Mrs. Deborah and I intercepted Greg, who claimed to be going to work on his day off, and brought him to the living room. "What's going on? I'm going to be late for work, make it quick." I looked at Greg with a cold stare as he said that. "You're lying about going to work on your day off, aren't you? You've really quit your job." Greg's face turned pale instantly. "What are you talking about? There's no way I quit my job. How many lies do you have to tell to be satisfied?" I called your company and asked them directly, there's no mistake. When I yelled at him like that, Greg froze, his body trembling. You supposedly resigned for personal reasons. But the truth is you were stealing money from your coworkers' wallets and quit because you were about to get caught, right? Greg stared in disbelief, seemingly shocked that I knew even this. I had called one of Greg's former colleagues who reluctantly told me. About 2 months ago, a female employee was making a fuss about money missing from her wallet. After that, similar incidents kept happening. Greg mentioned he had debts at a party, and he was always looking at people's wallets and bags. Plus, in his department, there were rumors that things always went missing. It was just pens and clips, and the loss was insignificant. There was no evidence of theft, so they've been handling it quietly. His colleague never claimed Greg was the culprit, but it seemed like he believed Greg was very likely involved. You're the one who did it, aren't you? When I sternly asked him that, Greg answered with a frightened nod, yes. But that wasn't the only secret Greg had. I pulled out an envelope and took out a few photos. Greg instantly looked away when he saw them, but I shoved them in front of his face. The photos showed Greg and a beautiful woman holding hands and walking. This clearly looks like an affair, doesn't it? I hired a private investigator to look into it. Be ready to pay child support. As I glared at Greg, he frantically started babbling about his affair. I met her randomly on the street. I fell in love with her before I knew it. She told me she truly loves me too. I was even angrier now, so I decided to deliver another blow to Greg. Greg, do you know your mistress's real name? Of course, it's Emily Davis, right? To Greg, who was wondering why I asked that, I revealed the truth. Sorry. That's a pseudonym. Her real name is Jessica Turner. She has a criminal record for fraud. No, that's a lie. There's no way Emily would commit fraud. Greg remained adamantly in denial, so I searched Jessica Turner on my smartphone and showed him an online article. In the article, Jessica Turner had been arrested for fraud, and there was a photo of her face. It was the same face as Greg's mistress. Well, are you ready to believe it now? Don't you think she got close to you just to swindle your money? When I said this with a disgusted tone, Greg murmured, "No way," and seemed to collapse. Seeing Greg's face filled with despair, I felt a small sense of relief in my chest. This was his punishment for cheating. But even so, it was almost poetic that a liar like Greg would be approached by a fraudster. Birds of a feather flock together, as they say. I was angry, but at the same time, I was also flabbergasted. But there was still something left that I wanted to say to Greg. I showed Greg a piece of paper. It was a divorce paper that I had asked a lawyer to prepare. I can't be married to a man like you anymore. You'd better prepare yourself for a divorce. But then Greg said, please forgive me. I have debts and I've lost my job. If you divorce me now, I'll be in financial trouble. I admit that I've stolen various things, but it's not a significant amount of money. I only intended to borrow it, and I plan to return it. Besides, we're family. Can't you forgive me for stealing money? He chose another woman over me. Now he's asking for forgiveness. He says he intended to return it, but I doubt how much of that is true. I was about to yell at Greg. But then, a loud voice said, enough is enough. It was Mrs. Deborah. It's not about the amount of money or family. Stealing from others is wrong. How can you not understand that even as an adult? And to top it off, you cheated. I can no longer see you as my son. Please let me cut ties with you. Greg's face instantly looked like he was about to cry. You're my mother, right? Can't you defend me a little? Because he had the audacity to beg like that, I decided to give him a piece of my mind. When I told Mrs. Deborah about your debts and how you stole my money, she was unbelievably angry. It was Mrs. Deborah who suggested calling your employer and hiring a private investigator. As I explained why I had to take a part-time job, Mrs. Deborah yelled, What? What is he thinking? Causing trouble for his precious family. There was absolutely no trace of the usually mild-mannered Mrs. Deborah. She was more angry than I had ever seen her before. We can't let this go. We have to take revenge. Greg might be hiding something else, so let's investigate thoroughly this time. She said this and quickly laid out a plan for revenge. It's true what they say, the kindest people are the scariest when they get angry. When I pointed this out, Greg must have realized that even his mother wouldn't help him. This time, he clung to Mark. Hey, Mark, you're a high schooler, but you wouldn't want to lose your dad, would you? Stand up for me. But Mark, his face bright red, glared at Greg. "I don't need a dad who steals and cheats. How dare you betray Mom?" Being abandoned by his son, Greg finally seemed to realize that he had no allies left. He was crying, but when Mrs. Deborah told him to apologize to Mary and Mark properly, with a stern voice, he was pressured by her intensity and kept apologizing. "I'm really sorry. I've reflected on my actions." It was too late for apologies. I couldn't possibly forgive him. "If you're truly remorseful, listen to my wish. Agree to the divorce immediately. If you have any objections, hire a lawyer." I thrust the divorce papers at him again, and finally, Greg seemed to accept our divorce. Afterwards, we reclaimed the money Greg stole and kicked him out of the house. We filed for divorce. Then, through our lawyer, we made a claim for child support. Perhaps finally sensing the gravity of the situation, he made a lump sum payment. After that, it seemed Greg was in serious financial trouble. Due to not only gambling but also lavishing luxury items on his mistress, he had accumulated actual debt of about $10,000. He must have racked up an astronomical amount of debt considering the amount he continued borrowing, but that's not my concern. Moreover, Greg was abandoned by his mistress. Probably, she was just after his money. Greg seemed to want to sue her for fraud, but since he was the one who voluntarily lavished her, he gave up in the end. Furthermore, 2 months after the divorce, Greg was arrested for embezzling money from his company. I made sure to inform Greg's former company that he had been a habitual thief. We considered turning him into the police ourselves, but we decided to leave it to the people of the victimized company. Considering my husband has a habit of lying, there might still be things he's hiding. Probably because I warned them, the company seemed to thoroughly investigate their finances. As a result, Greg's embezzlement was exposed. I wonder how much crime that man needs to commit to be satisfied. It was definitely the right decision to sever ties with him. If not careful, I might have been implicated in his crimes. With Greg, the breadwinner, gone, I managed to secure a full-time job through an acquaintance. I have enough income to support Mark and Mrs. Deborah. Mrs. Deborah is also working part-time. When I divorced Greg, Mrs. Deborah said, "I'm sorry my son has caused you so much trouble. I can't impose on you any longer, so I'll leave." However, living alone as a senior can be worrisome, and both Mark and I love Mrs. Deborah very much. "Greg and you are completely different people. I consider you as part of my precious family, so please stay with us forever." I managed to convince her to stay with that. Mrs. Deborah seems to have regained her vitality a little by working part-time and living her new life. Recently, she's been smiling more. Mark, too, who was deeply shocked by the recent incident, seems to be regaining his energy. Perhaps understanding our home situation, he even helps out with household chores sometimes. It seemed peaceful days were about to return to our home. I'm trying to forget about Greg and walk my own life path with a positive mindset. I want to keep working hard to support my family. I feel like a bright future is waiting. Well, this makes it clear, doesn't it? The entire inheritance goes to your brother. The will is genuine, so stop your doubting. What? Is it really okay for us to take all this money? My husband, looking down on me, and the elated sister-in-law. The $100 million inheritance from father will be inherited entirely by my brother. I stare at the will stating this with a sense of utter despair. Have I lost everything and am stuck with this despicable man for the rest of my life? But with one sentence from my brother, everything turns upside down. My name is Catherine. I'm a 55-year-old housewife. I have no children with my husband, Robert, and we live as a couple. Robert is, in a word, a typical chauvinist. Since the beginning of our marriage, Robert's commands were absolute, and I could neither defy him nor express my opinion. My husband, 10 years older than me, has no consideration for me at all. I serve Robert like a slave, desperately doing household chores, and if there's something he doesn't like, he doesn't hesitate to verbally abuse me. Being unable to have children was also blamed on me, and I cried in secret almost every day. I wanted to divorce, but I didn't want to worry my relatives, and I didn't have the financial strength to become independent. I've been enduring and staying strong under my arrogant husband, who has a knack for psychological abuse. My only emotional support was my father. My father was once a capable businessman. He built a company from scratch and developed it into a major corporation. Although he was a workaholic, he loved my brother and me in his own way. Shortly after I got married, my mother passed away in a car accident, and my father immersed himself more in work as if to distract himself from the loneliness. It seems the overwork took its toll. My father had a stroke and was taken to the hospital. Fortunately, his life was not in danger, but he was left paralyzed on the left side. The price for working so recklessly was a massive inheritance. I persuaded my father to retire. I was worried about my father living alone, so I managed to persuade my husband, and we moved into my father's house. Once a workaholic, my father seemed to age rapidly upon retirement, showing signs of dementia, and in no time, he was bedridden and in need of nursing care. My physical and mental burdens increased dramatically. In addition to everyday housekeeping and taking care of Robert, I now had to take care of my father with dementia. Sometimes my father would lay quietly, but other times he would shout and thrash around in the middle of the night, or he would wander out of the house. I was constantly exhausted due to lack of sleep, stress, and endless hard work. Although my father was often dazed, there were times when he was clear-minded. At such times, we could have a peaceful conversation like the old times. My father often thanked me and smiled sadly, saying, "I want to leave you with as much as I can." My father passed away. This happened 3 years after I started taking care of him. Although I was relieved from the burden of care, the loss of my father, my only emotional support, left me with an enormous sense of loss and loneliness. My only hope was my father's inheritance. An inheritance of $100 million, even if split in half with my brother, would be $50 million. With that amount of money, I could finally break free from my devil-like husband. It was my only remaining hope in life. Then, a few days later, I was called by Robert and our eldest son's wife, Naomi, to discuss the inheritance. Naomi's husband, that is, my brother, has been working overseas for several years. He had returned home for the funeral but had just returned to his assignment yesterday. In place of my brother, his wife Naomi would also be present. "Your dad's will was found in the back of the drawer. It's good that it was ready for us and it wasn't sealed, so let's take a look right away." A will? I didn't know there was such a thing. I was providing care every day, but I never saw him writing a will. I wondered why my husband, who hardly cared for my father, knew about it. I had an uneasy feeling and a bad premonition. "Let's read it. All of my assets will be inherited by my eldest son, Ken. Dated April 1st, John Smith." That's it. I couldn't believe my ears. I had always thought that my father's estate would be equally divided between my brother and me. I couldn't believe that all of my father's $100 million estate would be inherited only by my brother. Well, wait a minute. That's strange. Why would that be? My husband handed me the will and told me to see for myself as I panicked. Indeed, it was written on the will, along with my father's signature. I immediately suspected that the will was forged. My father had a good relationship with both my brother and me, and he wasn't the type to favor only one of us. But would my kind and straightforward brother really hoard the inheritance all to himself? As I was deep in thought, my brother's wife burst into laughter. "Wow! We get to keep all of his money? That feels kind of wrong. But if that's his wish, we have to respect it, right?" I absolutely couldn't accept this. As I silently held the will, both my husband and my brother's wife glared at me. "Hey, are you doubting this? If so, you can bring in a handwriting expert or something. Just because it's inconvenient for you doesn't mean you can go doubting it. You really have a bad attitude." "I'll do that," I murmured, deciding to get the will appraised. However, contrary to my expectations, the results were that it was unquestionably written by the testator himself. I was disappointed at the shocking results and fell into despair, thinking about the past. I had devoted my life to taking care of my husband and my father. Living in fear of my husband's anger, being hurt by his verbal abuse, and being called a worthless woman was painful, but my last days with my father were happy. Even though I believed that my father cared for me too. It was more shocking and unbearable for me to think that my beloved father didn't care about me than not receiving the inheritance. I probably have to leave this familiar house and land, because they are part of my father's real estate inheritance. My dream of divorcing my husband is also now back to square one. When I told my husband about the appraisal result of the will at home over the weekend, he sneered at me with a self-righteous face. "That settles it, all the inheritance goes to your brother. Don't go meddling in things anymore. The will was real. Always doubting, you worthless wife." He left the house after throwing those words. Speaking of which, my husband has been away from home a lot lately. He's been coming home from work very late, and he's often not home on weekends like this. I found it suspicious, but I didn't want to see my husband as much as possible, so I was actually relieved. Despite my husband's objections, I wanted to talk to my brother directly about the inheritance. My brother, who worked overseas, was always busy, but he was a kind and reliable person. I made sure in advance that my brother wasn't too busy, and then I gave him a call. After some brief greetings, my brother again apologized for leaving the care of our father entirely to me and thanked me for handling the funeral and various procedures. "Don't worry about it. By the way, Robert, about Dad's inheritance. Was it always decided that you would be the sole heir?" I tried to ask casually. It was unbearable to think that maybe I wasn't loved by my father, but I wanted to talk about it properly. "Huh? What do you mean? All of the inheritance goes to me?" My brother sounded surprised. I thought Naomi had told him, but it seems he was hearing about it for the first time. But the will was genuine, so the result wouldn't change. I told my brother about what happened. "I see. The handwriting on the will is Dad's and that was all it said, huh? Understood, I'll need some time to think. I'll get back to you. I'll tell Naomi not to proceed with anything until she hears from me," my brother said, ending the call. Intrigued yet patient, I waited for my brother's call. Days later, my brother contacted me. My brother had requested that I look into Naomi's suspicious activities by hiring a private investigator. He also advised me to claim my legitimate share from him. The legitimate share refers to the minimum portion of an inheritance that is guaranteed to an inheritor, and the amount varies based on your position in the family. In my case, I can claim dollar from my father's $25 million inheritance. Even with his will stating, all the inheritance should go to my brother, this legal provision would still allow me to inherit the $25 million. However, this did not sit well with my husband and my brother's wife. "The decision has already been made. Don't mess it up now," they protested. However, there was more to my brother's advice. "I'm not asking for the $25 million. All I want is this house, filled with memories of our father, and the land. The total estate is worth $100 million, but the real estate property is only worth $10 million. I'll cede all the rest of the inheritance to my brother." Still, the two of them continued to argue, so I continued. If this continues to escalate, I have been instructed by my brother to hire a lawyer to join the discussion. If it comes to that, I'm sure I'll inherit $25 million exactly. My husband and Naomi fell silent. Eventually, it seemed the two decided it was more profitable to settle for the $10 million worth of real estate. We finally agreed on the division of the inheritance. A few days later, I received the results of an investigation I had requested from a private investigator about Naomi. I immediately contacted my brother. After many twists and turns, the process of inheriting our father's estate was successfully completed. During the process, my brother Ken, from abroad, rushed to help. I inherited the family home and land, which was worth $10 million. My brother inherited the rest of the estate, which amounted to $90 million. Naomi and my husband were both in a good mood, with things progressing as they had hoped. After completing the inheritance proceedings, the four of us left the law office and returned to our father's house. While having a cup of tea in the living room, my brother began to speak, placing his smartphone on the table. "Well done, everyone. Now that we've successfully inherited Dad's estate, there's something I want to talk about," he said with a smile. With that, he pulled a document from his pocket and spread it out on the table. The faces of my husband and Naomi turned pale upon reading the content. "It's a will" was the title written on the document. At the end of it was my father's signature and stamp. The date was about 5 years ago. "This is a will that Dad entrusted to me when he was still working. It was created with 2 witnesses at a notary office. It's a legally valid will," my brother informed us. According to him, our father had drafted it before he had a stroke. His wife had already passed away, and in the event that something happened to him, he wanted to ensure his children would be properly provided for. The content of the will indicated that 1/4 of the total estate was to be left to Ken, who already had significant wealth, and 3/4 to Catherine, housewife. My father had made clear his intention not to change this will, and had explicitly stated in the will, "If there's any change to this will, the reason for the change must be stated. Any will that does not include a reason for change is considered null and void." My father was really pushing himself at work. I think he was considering all sorts of things, like what would happen if he fell gravely ill or became senile. The estate was enormous, so he prepared early to prevent any conflicts among the remaining family members. My brother said, caressing the will. The will contained an addendum, stating, "I hope that there will be no conflicts over the inheritance and that the family will continue to live happily together." It was a will filled with my father's warm wishes for his family. I was touched to know that I was loved by my father just as much as my brother, and my heart swelled. On the other hand, my husband and Naomi next to me turned pale. "So, if you're going to change this will, the reason has to be stated, or else it's all null and void. Even if it's in my dad's handwriting. Maybe he was forced to write it when he was in a delirious state due to dementia." Suddenly, my husband slammed the table. With a ferocious expression, he glared at my brother and growled, "Hey, Ken, do you have any proof? Calling me a criminal? I never said you forged the will, did I, Robert?" He then looked at his wife, Naomi, sitting next to him. Naomi remained silent. "I found it strange. Naomi informed me that my father had passed away and I was in the States for the funeral. After I returned abroad, apparently the topic of inheritance came up. But even though it concerned me, I wasn't informed of anything about it," my brother mentioned. He was looking at his wife, Naomi. Naomi still said nothing. "Quit your yapping. The inheritance is all settled, the $90 million is ours. It doesn't matter what you say now." "What do you mean by ours?" "The one who inherited is me," my brother countered calmly. "Shut up," my husband shouted back. The conversation was getting nowhere. "I'm not sure what you mean, but the $90 million I inherited are just worthless paper," my brother said calmly. "What?" my husband retorted, surprised. My brother explained patiently. Our father's estate was worth $100 million. All of the assets, apart from real estate, were stocks in our father's own company. Back when my father was running the company, everything was smooth sailing and the stocks were soaring. But after he stepped down, the company continued to run in the red, and it seemed to be on the verge of bankruptcy in the 3 years before he passed away. The stocks that once had a value exceeding $90 million was now virtually worthless pieces of paper. But that can't be possible, can it?" "It's the truth. I inherited knowing that. I plan on restructuring my father's company, and since it had nothing to do with you, I didn't bother telling you." My husband seems rattled and mumbles to himself. He can't seem to come to terms with reality. It was then that Naomi spoke up for the first time. "Hang on, just wait a minute. What do you mean by that? So you're saying I unknowingly inherited trash, while Catherine alone inherited $10 million? That's not fair. That's unfair." Beside the screaming Naomi, my brother sighed. "Naomi, I inherited my father's estate. You weren't disadvantaged in any way. Is there any reason for you to be this angry?" But, I thought we were going to get all of that $100 million. I planned for so many things." Robert, my husband, glared sharply at the flustered Naomi. "So you conspired with Robert, thinking you were going to get all of my father's money. And while you were at it, you were having an affair, weren't you? Naomi and her husband fell silent as if frozen in place. Why? Naomi muttered in a raspy voice. Glancing at her, my brother continued. After our phone call, my brother started to suspect Naomi. Why didn't she talk to me about the inheritance? Why had her interactions with me been so curt lately, and why had she started ignoring my calls? I had my suspicions, and after seeing her post on social media, I was certain she was having an affair. Pretty soon, I'm going to come into a lot of money. I'll be living the life of a celebrity. I've been talking it over with my babe about how to spend it. He told me we're going to have so much fun once the money comes in. I'm so happy. I don't remember having that conversation with you, Naomi. I wonder who this babe of yours might be. No. You got it all wrong. This isn't. Ignoring his flustered wife, my brother pulled out a large envelope. He took out several photos from the envelope and lined them up next to the will. They were pictures of Naomi and Robert going into a hotel with their arms entwined. The close relationship between the two was clear. I've been abroad, you know. I hired a private detective to investigate because I was curious about your babe. Presented with undeniable evidence, Naomi started to shake. Looking at Naomi's affair partner, my husband, I saw that he was boiling red with anger, a stark contrast to the pale Naomi. Damn you, snooping around like a stalker. What the hell is all this? With your ridiculous will and these photos. What a joke. Stop! Suddenly, Naomi raised her voice. She approached my brother in a seductive voice, like a bad actress. Hey, you're wrong, it's all a misunderstanding. It's all Robert's doing. He convinced me that if I listened to him, I'd get all of your dad's inheritance. Hey, wouldn't you be happy to receive $100 million? I thought it was for your benefit. My husband, who had been easily betrayed, stared at Naomi with his mouth wide open. This picture, we were just messing around. You were always overseas, and I was lonely. You're also to blame, aren't you? Hey, forgive me. The $90 million is no good anymore, but let's take the $10 million from Catherine's real estate. Did you forge the will? Huh? Of course not. Robert did it. He said it was easy and had it written by your father. See, I'm not at fault. When the matter of the forged will was revealed, my husband flew into a rage and lunged at Naomi, but my brother quickly intervened. You bastards. You don't have any evidence. You all will regret this in hell. As he ranted and kicked a chair, my brother coolly watched and slowly took out his phone. Oh, it seems my phone was on record mode. It's been recording everything since we came home. That was a careless mistake. The husband and Naomi turned pale and fell silent. Also, I didn't mention it, but this room has surveillance cameras that record everything. I installed them because of Dad's severe dementia, just in case something happened to him. What a coincidence. In the silent living room, only my brother kept talking. Falsifying a will is a crime. Your earlier outburst at us could be considered a threat, punishable by law. There's a police station nearby, and they would be here quickly if we report it. But then again, since the inheritance issue has been settled and if you swear not to touch Catherine's stuff in the future, maybe there's no need to report. What do you think? As he said this, my brother started operating his phone. I might as well send this voice recording to my computer overseas. Having been silently observing the exchange until now, I pulled out a document from my bag and thrust it at my husband. Robert, I want a divorce. Whoa, hold on, reconsider this. I'm sorry. We've been together for years, haven't we? Who do you think has been providing for you all this time? I've had enough. Stop with the excuses and just agree to the divorce. If not, I'm calling the police. I clenched my smartphone with a look of grim determination. Robert drooped his shoulders and nodded. Naomi. Our relationship is over. Once I received the money, you were planning to take it and be with Ken, weren't you? I heard the records of your exchanges with Ken from a private investigator. Naomi hung her head, covering her face with her hands. Afterwards, both my brother and I got divorced. Following the divorce, Robert left the house. The inheritance that he thought he'd acquired was not only worthless, but Naomi also spilled the beans about the forgery of the will. Everything that happened in the living room was also fully recorded. Robert must have been livid, but there was nothing he could do about it. The surveillance camera in the living room was originally installed for my father's care, but it also served the purpose of collecting evidence of Robert's emotional abuse. Even if I acquired my father's inheritance, I was planning to submit it as evidence in a divorce trial if Robert refused to divorce. When I told my brother about this, he suggested we use that camera as well. After the divorce, Robert lost his job due to rumors of his affair spreading in the workplace. It seems his colleagues had spotted him going in and out of hotels with a woman who was not his wife. Robert's parents had already passed away, and with the loss of his job and home, he disappeared. I had been requesting a share of his assets, but I didn't want to be involved with Robert anymore, especially after having inherited some wealth. Naomi, the woman Robert cheated with, also lost everything just like him. She had been insisting, "I don't want to break up. Don't leave me," during the divorce proceedings with my brother Ken, but the divorce was finalized when solid evidence was presented at the mediation. Naomi had been splurging money while Robert was not around, and she was billed for all of it, leaving her penniless. Since she had not been working from the start, and like Robert, didn't have a home to return to, she's now scraping by in a dilapidated public housing project, living off welfare. My brother Ken is still working overseas, but he has put up the house where he lived with Naomi for sale, and he will be moving in with me in the house that our father left us. I've always lived frugally, but my life has become stable since my brother started contributing to the living expenses. The value of the land my father left me has been increasing year by year, and now it's easily worth over $100 million. I've been freed from caring for my dad and from the emotional abuse from my husband, and now I'm living a relaxed life. With time to myself and now living alone in a large house, I started to think about how I could utilize it. Around that time, I saw a TV program about foreign exchange students doing homestays, and I thought, that's it. I decided to start a room rental service in my spare rooms. I'm offering rooms at a low cost to college students and exchange students, and now I live a lively life with them. We all eat meals together, play games, and help each other with assignments. We live together happily, almost like a family. On other days when I have some free time, I also do activities like reading storybooks at the local public library. I don't have any children of my own, and my husband and I had grown apart. After losing my beloved father, I was always worried about how lonely I would be, but now my days are unbelievably lively and vibrant. Even at my age, it's so rewarding to connect with young people and make even a small contribution to society. There have been many things in my life that were so hard, I wanted to run away. But now, I'm loosely connected with my brother, my roommates, and people in my community, and I'm living fulfilling days. Every day, I savor the modest happiness I've finally achieved. Let's break off our engagement. I'm marrying her instead. What? That's the way it is, sorry about that. The one laughing triumphantly next to him is my half-sister. Several months have passed since that shocking event. Just as the wound from the broken engagement began to fade and I started to move forward, I saw my sister again on my way home from work. Huh? Why are you here? I tried to hurry past without her noticing, but she said, "Found you. I've been looking for you." She seemed angry, but I had no idea why I should be the one being scolded. If anything, I should be the one who's mad. What do you want? I've got nothing to say to you. What the hell is going on? You've been lying to me, haven't you? Huh? What on earth are you talking about? I'm a saleswoman and I just turned 30. A year ago, I started dating a man named Michael and he proposed to me a month ago. We were engaged, but that was called off today. As someone who wants to get married and have kids like me, having the engagement broken off just before turned 30 is nothing short of a disaster. After breaking up with Michael, I headed straight to my family home where my mother was waiting. Of course, the fact that my engagement was off, and the reason why, was too cruel to bear alone, so I called my mom immediately. She quickly said, "I'm at home right now, so come over." "Where are you? Should I come and get you?" Even though I was dumped by my fiancé, there were people who cared for me. Just feeling that lightened my heart a little. I told her I could get home myself and, with my mind blank, I got on the train and headed for my family home. When I arrived, my mother was waiting for me at the front door and said, "Welcome home." I'm home. As I said that, the tears I had been holding back came pouring out like a waterfall. Without asking what had happened, my mother silently waited for my tears to calm down. Then, when my tears had subsided a bit, I started to tell my mother about what had happened that day. I was supposed to meet Michael today, but when I got to the meeting place, Becky was there too. What? It's not surprising that my mother was shocked. Becky is my half-sister. Although she's my half-sister, we can't exactly say we get along well. We've had a complicated relationship since forever. I had never introduced Michael to her, so I had no idea why Becky and Michael were together. But the unexpected pair had more shocking news. "Harper, there's something I have to tell you today. I want to break off our engagement." "What?" Of course, I couldn't accept it right away. Things had been going well with Michael recently. We had even taken a short trip last week and discussed our wedding rings. There had been no signs that he was going to break up with me. Why? Can you tell me why? I had a bad feeling when I saw Becky next to him. That's because Becky has always tried to steal my boyfriends and friends in the past. But after growing up, none of this happened, and I honestly thought it wouldn't happen anymore. I wanted to believe so. But Michael's reply was, "I've fallen in love with someone. I intend to marry her." That's what he said. And when I saw him looking at Becky so adoringly, I felt dizzy. Becky looked at me triumphantly and said, "That's the way it is." Sorry about that. Michael may not know about my relationship with Becky. Even so, I couldn't believe this was a coincidence. I was certain that Becky had planned this, to break off my engagement. But even knowing that, there's nothing I can do now. If Michael has fallen in love with Becky, no matter how much I try to convince him otherwise, it will just sound like I'm a sore loser. I should be angrier at having the person I promised to marry taken from me. Maybe I should be clinging more, saying I don't want to break up. But I couldn't do that. I felt that if I did, I would feel even more miserable. "I understand, it's okay now." I said just that in a small voice, and turned my back on them. Then I called my mom, and that brings us to now. After hearing everything, my mom paused a bit, and then in a kind voice said, "You must have been through a lot, cry all you want until you feel okay." Yeah, thanks. I'm really glad to have my mom. It's going to be tough for a while, but I'll surely be able to think positively. That's when my mom shocked me with her words. "But, you know, it's a good thing. Even if you had married your fiancé, I don't think you would have been happy." That's what I believe. I was taken aback by the unexpected statement. What? What do you mean? Then my mom smiled softly and said, "Because he's a man who could easily discard a wonderful woman like you. Also, I don't think things will go well between those two. Happiness built on hurting others so ruthlessly is fragile. There's something else that's been on my mind. I don't have proof, so I can't say it now. But I'm sure you'll understand soon, Harper. Don't worry, you're going to be happy." I was really curious about what my mom wanted to say, but I don't have the energy to think deeply now, and strangely I could trust my mom's words. So that day, I didn't pursue it any further and decided to go back to my own house because I had work the next day. On my way home, I was absent-mindedly thinking about the past. My parents divorced when I was 3 years old. My dad had an affair and left us. My mom has raised me by herself ever since. And the woman he had an affair with was Becky's mother. I have no intention of denying Becky's existence. But considering Becky is 2 years younger than me, it's easy to see how despicable my father's actions were. As an adult, I feel this more deeply. Even so, my father, as he is, seemed to care a bit about me, his daughter. He always sent me a gift for my birthday, and would take me out for meals a few times a year. When I was young and didn't even understand the meaning of the word affair, I purely loved my father who would come to see me. And my mom never said anything against that. I first met Becky when I was in the 3rd grade. Normally, I would dine with my dad, just the two of us, but this was the first time he brought along Becky. I was still a child back then, so I didn't care who Becky was or anything about her. I was just thrilled to be able to play with a girl slightly younger than me. Of course, Becky was just a kid at that time too. Regardless of our respective statuses and relationships, I remember playing well together. Looking back now, I wonder what was going on in my dad's head to make us meet. During elementary school, days passed where I would occasionally meet my dad and Becky, and we would eat together. But as I entered middle school and became busier with club activities and tutoring, naturally the times I saw my dad decreased. By the time I was in the 8th grade, even the messages from my dad ceased. By then, I knew without needing the specifics that my parents had divorced and my dad had a new family. Understanding that fact, I didn't think about contacting him. I can't say that I didn't feel lonely, but I thought that my mom must have been feeling this way even before me. But one day, when I was in the 9th grade, Becky enrolled in our school as a new student. I had no idea where she lived, so I never thought she'd end up at the same middle school. When I saw her, it felt like I was reuniting with an old friend, so I called out to her. "Becky, long time no see." Since elementary school, Becky had always been the girl with soft, white hair, big eyes, and long eyelashes. She was the epitome of the kind of beautiful girl that other girls admired, but in middle school, she had become even more stunning. Indeed, she was so noticeable among the new students that she became a hot topic in my grade. When I called out to her, Becky stared at me with her large eyes and said, "Who are you?" I could tell it was her right away, but had she forgotten me? Considering how young she was when we used to play together, it was understandable. Given the complicated nature of our relationship, I hesitated to explain. Although I was disappointed that we couldn't have a proper conversation, I opened my mouth, deciding to pretend it was a case of mistaken identity. Then, Becky said, "Oh, you're the poor girl who got dumped by my dad." Huh? Even Becky's friends who were with her were taken aback and asked her to repeat. "Apparently, my dad was deceived by a terrible woman when he was young. He couldn't bear it, divorced her, and then married my mom. Do you need something? You're scaring me." With that, Becky started to act afraid of me. "What? What do you mean, terrible woman? Your dad is the terrible one, isn't he?" I couldn't help but retort. But this was just so typical of Becky. No matter how much I tried to explain myself, the atmosphere had entirely shifted in Becky's favor. "You're a scary senior. If you continue to bully Becky, we'll report you to the student guidance counselor." That's what one of Becky's friends told me. No, I didn't mean it like that. Regardless of what I said, I was not believed and ended up being gossiped about in school as the senior who bullied the cute junior out of jealousy. We used to play together so well when we were kids. I couldn't fathom why Becky acted the way she did, and it broke my heart. I was even dumped by my boyfriend who accused me of bullying a junior, something he said he hadn't expected from me. To add insult to injury, a few months later, he was dating Becky. This happened twice. I understand that in a small middle school community, it's not unheard of to date the same person. But for it to happen twice? That was beyond mere coincidence. I tried confronting Becky about it, but it only backfired with further accusations of me being a bully. Moreover, these false rumors about me never cleared up until graduation. I finally gave up on understanding Becky and chose to attend a high school where no one from my middle school was enrolled. No one knew about the rumors, and there was no Becky, so I wasn't worried about any further gossip. I was at peace with my high school life, but in the spring of my junior year, I was in for the worst surprise. Becky had enrolled in the same high school. And she was also a manager of the soccer club, just like me. As soon as Becky saw me, she said, "Oh, Harper is here too, nice to see you." This time, she was acting like a sweet junior. This is the same girl who gave me a hard time back in middle school. I just couldn't keep up with her dramatic transformation, and I didn't even feel like building a good relationship as senior and junior. I had no intention of being mean, but I was scared because I had no idea what Becky was planning behind her smiles. My bad hunch proved right. "Harper, why are you so cold to me? Did I do something wrong? I'm upset." Becky accused me of this while crying in front of the whole soccer team. What? I didn't think I had been that harsh, and if anyone had been mean, it was always her towards me. Becky was playing the victim and trying to demean me. She did it again. I thought to myself, but it was too late. All the team members adored Becky, who was cute, cheerful, and considerate. I thought I had established a good relationship of trust as a manager, but in this situation, no matter how much I struggled, I was the bad guy. I ended up being warned by the school administration for bullying my junior, and my position in the soccer team also suffered. I was perfectly labeled as a mean senior who bullied her junior. Back then, I had a crush on the soccer team captain of my grade. I had been quietly nurturing this feeling for over 2 years, and although it may sound presumptuous, I think we had been getting along well, going out on our days off and such. But with this rumor spreading, I was obviously kept at a distance. And when summer vacation ended, he was dating Becky, and I thought it was a nightmare. Why is Becky so against me? I have nothing to say if all of this is said to be a coincidence. But have I done something to Becky that she has to bother me even at school club activities? If the one who took away my father was resentful, I would understand, but Becky has both parents and should be living happily. No matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't understand Becky's thoughts. I ended my high school life in the worst possible way and decided to study abroad in hopes of escaping Becky's pursuit. Becky didn't follow me that far. Even after finishing my study abroad and living in Japan, Becky didn't show up for a while. After graduating from high school, I didn't know what Becky was doing or where she was. I was trying to forget the nightmares of my student days and the source of them, Becky, and was trying to get married and be happy. I didn't expect to be messed with by Becky again here. Is it a twist of fate, or is Becky planning something again? I don't know, but I definitely don't want to live my life in fear of Becky. I was sure of that. From then on, I took on more work than usual to avoid unnecessary thoughts. Unlike love, the more you work, the more results you get. I was recognized by my boss for my good work, and these successful experiences gradually healed my heart. My mom was right. As long as I don't give up, I can live positively. Just when I thought so, a few months after the breakup with Michael, when I finished my work and arrived at the station to go home, I saw a surprising sight. Becky? I saw Becky standing in front of a sculpture near the station. She seemed to be waiting for someone. I wondered if she might be meeting up with Michael. Regardless, I absolutely could not let myself bump into Becky. Although I don't currently have a boyfriend or anyone I'm fond of, you never know what else she might take from me. Making sure she didn't notice me, I swiftly made my way to the ticket gates. But then, I heard a voice exclaim, "Found you. I was looking for you." And the next thing I knew, my arm was firmly grasped. I could see anger in her eyes, but I couldn't understand why I should be the one she's mad at. Rather, I'm the one who should be mad. "What do you want?" "I don't have anything to talk about," I told her, shaking off Becky's hand. But she grabbed my wrist again, forcefully, and dragged me to the side of the ticket gate. Just how selfish and pushy can this woman be? With a feeling somewhere between shock and exasperation, I quietly followed her. When we finally reached a less crowded spot, Becky angrily spat out, "What's the meaning of all this? You've been deceiving me, haven't you?" "What are you talking about?" I retorted instantly, as I had no clue what she was talking about. "Don't play dumb with me, it's about Michael, obviously." "Huh. I'm the one who was hurt the most when it comes to Michael. There's no reason for her to yell at me." And then, Becky uttered words I couldn't believe. "Michael took $20,000 from me." You must have conspired with him, didn't you? What? What are you talking about? Seeing my genuine surprise, Becky sank to the ground, out of energy. So you're saying you didn't know? Michael said he needed $20,000 for his sick mom's operation, so I lent him the money. But the day after I gave him the money, I couldn't get in touch with him. His house was empty. I thought you used Michael to get back at me for taking all the men away from you, but is that really not the case? If what she said is true, did Michael commit marriage fraud? I can't believe the person I was engaged to turned out to be a fraud. The thought of it sends chills down my spine. I really didn't know. Sure, Michael said the same thing to me, but I didn't have that kind of savings, and I said I couldn't ask my mom for it either, so he immediately broke off our engagement. I don't know how you two met, but perhaps when he realized he couldn't get money from me, he switched his target to you. I was surprised at myself for being able to talk about Michael, who I was heartbroken over, as if it was someone else's business. But Becky, of course, wasn't in a place to think about that. I was irritated when I saw you coming out of a jewelry store, looking happy with a guy. That's why I stole him to get back at you, but I never thought it would turn out like this. I finally heard Becky's true feelings. As I suspected, she had intentionally stolen my boyfriends, the men I loved, and even my fiancé. I said to Becky, exasperated, "You're beautiful and have a bright, captivating charm. But because you've only wished for my misfortune and acted thoughtlessly, haven't you brought this unnecessary disaster upon yourself? If you hadn't interfered this time, I might have been the one hurt. You've made your own life difficult." Then Becky cut off my words, yelling in anger. "Shut up! Don't you dare lecture me! If it weren't for you, Dad would have been all mine. That's what I didn't like. Mom and Dad were always fighting over child support for you, and every time Dad visited you, Mom cried. I hated you." This was the first time I heard Becky's true feelings. I, who was left alone with my mother, did feel the absence of my father from time to time, but I never had to witness their fights or experience any heart-wrenching feelings. Of course, I think my mom felt sad in ways I couldn't see. But I was raised happy as her daughter. On the other hand, Becky, who appeared to have a happy family with both parents, was dealing with struggles unknown to others. That's not to say I think it's okay for her to harass me, not at all. Hearing Becky's true feelings for the first time, a part of me couldn't help but feel sympathy. I've lent out all my savings and even gotten into debt. I quit my job to get married. What am I supposed to do now? Becky lamented. It's her own fault she got caught up in this marriage fraud while trying to harass me. Honestly, I can't help but think she brought this upon herself. But after hearing what she just said, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. I can't help you with money. But I can at least help you find a job, I offered. Huh? She probably didn't expect me to throw her a lifeline. She looked at me in surprise. Someone at my company just left their receptionist job. They're looking for a replacement. Of course, I won't forgive you if you try to harass me again. But if you've learned your lesson, I'll help as much as I can. Even I thought I was being too lenient. But we are sisters after all. Seeing Becky so broken and crying, I couldn't just ignore her. I am sorry. I'm really sorry. Becky cried, sobbing uncontrollably. She must have been overwhelmed with regret for everything. From then on, Becky really did start working as a receptionist at my company. Even after all that harassment, and despite thinking I never wanted to have anything to do with her again. I can't believe I was stupid enough to invite her to work at the company where I work. As expected, Becky became popular in the company due to her vibrant appearance and innate brightness. But she's finally learned her lesson and doesn't harass me anymore. She looks a little embarrassed whenever I pass by, but she doesn't spread nasty rumors or speak in a fake voice. Honestly, I'm relieved. By the way, it seems that my mom once overheard a suspicious phone call from Michael when we were engaged. But she didn't have any evidence, so she was debating on what to say to me when the engagement was broken off. While the situation isn't what we imagined, in the end, my mom, Becky and I are living our lives positively in unexpected ways. Whatever hardships may come in the future, I'll remember my mom's words. No matter what, I'll be happy. I'll be fine. I'll chant in my heart.